Today, we want to start thinking about how, like George Takei, we can use visual media to communicate about things like racism and ethnocentrism. That's the goal of the assignment, is to explore the use of visual media in this kind of anthropological communication. So to contextualize this a little bit, why are we doing this and so on? You're in a general education class, and so you're learning about the social sciences. You're learning about, the concepts such as racism and how anthropologists use them to explain human forms of behavior, particularly under a highly globalized and interconnected world. So if we're thinking about mass incarceration of Japanese Americans during the 1940s, this is something that can be analyzed with that kind of conceptual framework. We're also in a kind of global studies general ed course. So you're trying to understand things like cultural diversity, human diversity from the perspective of different peoples throughout the world. Here in this particular section of the course, we're looking at, Japanese American perspectives. And you're learning to really think critically, right, about this kind of information and to form your own perspective, the kind of heart of why you're required to take certain kinds of general education classes. So some general ed classes will focus on quantitative reasoning, some will focus on written communication, and in this particular general education class, we're focusing on creative thinking in the social sciences, creative thinking in a field like global studies. EW really defines kind of creative thinking as integrating ideas by creating a novel product. So producing something that has not been produced before.
So what exactly is a collage? Well, it's a creative technique that involves assembling various kinds of materials. It can be photographs, pieces of paper, fabric, really any kind of object onto a flat surface to create a new kind of composition. Now, artists have been using this for a very long time, combining different materials and ideas into one new narrative. Various forms of symbolism and abstraction, political commentary, and cultural identity have all been explored through the medium of collage. Japanese artists such as Tadanori Yoko have used the form realistically to illustrate historical periods, and Japanese American artists such as Paul Horiuchi have explored time and change in abstract ways. Here you can see Paul Horiuchi in the late 1960s at work on a large-scale collage. There, reflected on the right, is his exploration of time and change as the collage of mixed papers was exposed to various elements such as wind and rain before.
And so for the analog visual forms, this first project, you're being asked to create a collage that represents your reflections and responses to our discussions about racism, ethnocentrism, and the Japanese internment. So you want to incorporate various kinds of images, symbols, and text right on this theme that speak to that historical context, your perspective, the potential social impact of the issues, and so on. How does your collage represent the themes that we're discussing? I mean, that's one of the primary things when I look at your work that I am aiming for, because you're using this form to communicate to me about what you've learned about the anthropological understanding of, racism and the study of it through the case study. What's the relationship between what we're learning, right, and right now? So this class, Global Cultural Encounters, is meant to address issues that are not focused in one moment of time. So we've talked about the ways that human societies have become interconnected back into the ancient world system. And so we could be looking at racism and ethnocentrism through various moments of time. When we're looking at George Takei's work, Takei himself has this goal that talking about the experience of Japanese Americans in the 40s is relevant to issues today. And so does your collage in one way or another kind of speak to our present historical moment in some sense? What are the implications of this collage for our conversations?
Here's an example of a previous student collage. In the collage, the student expresses their understanding of the concepts of racism and ethnocentrism as experienced by Japanese Americans by assembling relevant images, text, and materials into a unified whole. In this sense, the collage is used to critically analyze and communicate about a very complex issue by juxtaposing these images. You see a juxtaposition of images around ethnic pride, but you also see images, right, connected to racial exclusion that are brought into one unified work of collage.
Thinking a little bit about the process of this, maybe you've never explored a collage on your own. And so, like anything, you would brainstorm it out, research it a bit. You can go to the library webpage and do a search for potentially magazines from the 40s. You can think about newspapers from the 1940s. You can look at the large trove of archival photographs related to Japanese Americans and the incarceration and so on. And then it's like composing them. So usually you're going to want more images than you can actually use in your collage, so that you have this kind of choice. And when you start assembling your images, what I find one interesting thing about this is that they sort of do their own thing sometimes, and you're really working not as like the sole creator here, that the materials that you bring have certain kinds of possibilities, and you can't just do anything with them. You have to kind of work with their own possibilities. I find that an interesting part of this. And that's when you see that interaction of the images, you begin to cut them in ways that you can arrange them together. And usually it's very, very simple. You need a glue stick, you need glue, and you need paper for this. You can use lots of different materials. Absolutely don't have to be confined to paper. But, in the most basic sense, that's really all you need. You can finalize to bring the image together using acrylic paint, which sort of I can eliminate aspects of the qualities of the materials I'm using by applying a surface, right, that almost erases them. So you can use colored papers, you can add shapes and things, you can add any kind of detail and texture that makes your collage more interesting and visually appealing, visually engaging, if you will. Again, it doesn't have to be beautiful. The point here is not just creating beauty. The point, right, is, again, to make something visually engaging that allows us to communicate and think and talk about anthropological concept. You're also asked to produce an accompanying statement. And so if you think about collage artists, they're also often going to have captions or other print material that goes along with their work. And so you want to produce a statement that says a little bit about who you are, what the collage you did is, and so on. Maybe elaborate on the themes in your collage, how they connect to course concepts. If you have symbolic kinds of things in the collage, you'd want to talk about that in your artist statement or your student statement in this case. Many of these kinds of collage exhibitions would also provide some basic information about what the materials and techniques you used. And this can even include citations. For our field, you would want to have a citation for all of the material that you use, all the archival kinds of materials and so on. Maybe something about yourself and your perspective. So one example, in my work, in my assignment, in my collage, I explore the intersection of cultural diversity, globalization, and racism. I explore the intersection of these through the medium of mixed media collage. Drawing inspiration from anthropology lectures and George Takei's story of incarceration, I created a collage that reflects my imagination of how Japanese Americans might have spoken back to their political leaders. Thematically, my collage explores the theme of racism in Americans' fear of Japanese Americans during World War II. My process included the use of archival photographs, online images, acrylic paint, and Japanese art paper. These materials serve as the building blocks for my collage, and together they produce a new meaning beyond any one single material. Through the act of cutting, rearranging, and adding text, I disrupt the original meaning and context of these materials and create a new product about how Japanese Americans have taught us about racism and created a more resilient and just U.S. society. It's a basic way of putting a statement together to accompany the collage that will help people understand it, help people get more out of your collage itself. So we're going to have a gallery walk. And the gallery walk's really a nice way of not just sitting in the seat, being passive. We're going to exhibit your work in the classroom, and then we'll be able to interact with it. We'll be able to look at the statements and look at the collage. We'll be able to ask questions and talk about the work, and really ultimately facilitate a deepening discussion about racism and ethnocentrism and this case study that we have, right, of Japanese American experience. So to conclude, we just went through what Project One is all about. This is, for me, it's just an opening of our discussion of this.